Welcome to the debate. When we trace the etymological roots of the word mentor, we don't find ourselves in a corporate boardroom or, staring at a LinkedIn profile. We find ourselves in the epic verses of Homer's Odyssey. When Odysseus went off to fight in the Trojan War, he entrusted his son Telemachus to the care of his old friend, whose name was literally mentor. But here is the fascinating part that almost everyone misses. In the story, the old man mentor is, well, he's actually somewhat ineffective. He's a well-meaning guy, sure, but he doesn't really know how to ignite the boy's potential. It isn't until the goddess Athena assumes mentor's form, actual divine intervention, that the young Telemachus receives the guidance he needs to grow up.
That is such a striking distinction to start with. It suggests that true mentorship isn't just a job description, or an assignment. It requires a spark of something profound, a profound, almost magical human chemistry to actually work. But today, we aren't waiting around for goddesses to appear. We are using databases, algorithms, and HR mandates to try and force that spark into existence.
Precisely. We are discussing the engineering of wisdom. We're talking about mentorship defined generally as the patronage, guidance, and psychosocial support given by an experienced person to a learner. But the central question for us today is really one of structure versus serendipity. Can that delicate human chemistry required for effective mentorship be successfully engineered through formal programs? Or does its true power rely on organic, unforced connections that institutions just cannot replicate?
Right. It's a question of whether we can industrialize a relationship that is, at its core, fundamentally personal. I'm going to be arguing that the best mentorship is organic. When you try to force these bonds through formal programs matching strangers based on keywords or career goals, you risk creating hollow relationships. Or worse, systems of corporate control. You just end up with a calendar invite, not a real mentor.
I see why you think that, but let me offer a different perspective. I'll be arguing that formal mentorship is not just a corporate nice-to-have, but a necessary, evidence-based engine for equity, for retention, and for career development. If we rely solely on those organic connections, mentorship just remains an exclusionary old boys club where only the people who already fit the mold fit the guidance. Without the engineering, talent is left to rot on the vine.
Fair enough. So let's get into the machinery you're proposing.
I want to start by grounding us in the reality of why organizations even intervene in the first place. We aren't just guessing that mentorship works. There was a massive meta-analysis of 112 individual research studies that found mentorship has significant benefits across the board. I'm talking behavioral, attitudinal, health-related, relational, motivational, and of course, career-related. This isn't anecdotal, it's empirical. When people have mentors, they perform better, they feel better, and they advance faster.
Okay, but I don't dispute that mentorship itself is beneficial. I mean, the data on having a guide is clear. My issue is with the delivery method. Just because a relationship is a good thing doesn't mean you can assign it to someone like a laptop or a parking space.
But in a professional setting, leaving this to chance is just negligent. I mean, look at the retention data from Beverly Kay and Sharon Jordan Evans. They found that new hires who are paired with a mentor are twice as likely to stay in their jobs than those who don't get that mentorship. That's a staggering statistic. If you are running an organization, you can't afford to just hope a goddess appears to guide your new employees. You have to build the structure.
Retention is a metric, certainly. But are we measuring the soul of the interaction or just the stickiness of the employment contract?
We're measuring success. And historically, we have to remember why formal mentorship really exploded in the United States. In the late 20th century, advocates for workplace equity realized that organic networks, the golf course deals, the after-hours drinks, were systemic barriers. That's what created the glass ceiling for women and the bamboo ceiling for Asian Americans. Formal programs, where goals and schedules and training are standardized, were developed specifically to make sure that the transfer of knowledge and social capital wasn't just for the privileged few who happen to look like the boss.
I understand the intention is access. I do. But I don't buy that the mere existence of a program equals the solution. I'm looking at the distinction between a real relationship and an assignment. Research involving over 1,000 employees found that satisfaction with the mentoring relationship had a much stronger impact on attitudes than just the presence of a mentor. In fact, a bad match, one that's forced on paper, can be worse than no match at all. It creates cynicism and makes the employee feel like a box to be checked.
But that's an argument for better matching, not for abandoning the program.
Well, the trend suggests the program itself might be the problem, or at least that it's displacing something better. We're seeing a decline in what I would call real mentorship. Between 2013 and 2022, informal mentorship, the kind that occurs naturally without any recruitment or matching, declined by 13%. This is the nurturing model, or the friendship model, where a mentor creates an open, supportive environment. Instead, these formal programs often devolve into what Cindy Buell describes as the cloning model.
The cloning model?
Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. The mentor teaches the learner as if the goal is to make them a perfect replica of the mentor. It becomes about conformity, not growth. When an institution formalizes the process, the goal shifts from help this person grow to mold this person to fit our current machinery. That is the danger of engineering wisdom. You strip away the individuality of the learner in favor of the company standard.
I think that's a very cynical view of the pedagogy. You're describing bad formal mentorship and presenting it as the default. But let's look at how the engineering of these matches has actually evolved. This brings us to our first core area of debate, the matching paradox. You seem to imply that formal matching is just drawing names out of a hat, or that it always leads to this cloning.
Well, often it feels that way to the participants. You fill out a form, you wait a week, and then you get an email introducing you to Steve from accounting, who you have nothing in common with, except that you both work on the third floor.
That may have been true 20 years ago, but modern matching approaches are much more sophisticated. We see matching by committee, where senior leaders in HR or learning and development actually review profiles, goals, and strengths to create a strategic fit. Even better, we have self-match technology, databases that allow learners to search for and select a mentor based on their own development needs. This hybridizes the organic element with the structural availability. It's not forced, it's facilitated. It's like a dating app for professional growth. You still have to choose, but the pool is curated.
But technology cannot predict rapport. That is the fundamental flaw. You can match keywords, data analysis, leadership, marketing, but you can't match personalities. Research shows that formal programs that just assign mentors without any input perform poorly. And even with input, look at the rise of speed networking.
Speed networking is a valid entry point. It creates collision density.
It's a caricature of mentorship. Mentors and learners introduced in these short little sessions, reducing a complex human relationship to a first impression. It's speed dating for your career. You cannot engineer deep trust in a 5-minute round robin. You might exchange business cards, but you aren't exchanging wisdom. You're just networking.
Because you are prioritizing the comfort of the connection over the necessity of access. You're assuming that rapport is the only thing that matters. Let's look at the class divide in informal mentorship. The journal National Affairs cites research indicating that middle-class youth benefit significantly from informal mentors because they have the social capital to find them. However, a meta-analysis comparing over 3,000 middle-class youth to nearly 800 low-income youth found that low-income youth did not see the same upward mobility from their informal connections.
And why is that? If the connection is organic, shouldn't it yield the same results?
Because their organic networks don't have the leverage. A low-income youth might have a wonderful organic mentor who loves them, a neighbor, a former teacher, but that mentor doesn't have the power to get them the corporate job. Structure levels the playing field. Formal matching ensures that a junior employee who doesn't know the secret handshake still gets introduced to the person who holds the keys. If we rely on chemistry, we rely on bias. We rely on people mentoring people who remind them of themselves.
And that brings us directly to the issue of diversity and the complexity of these forced relationships. You argue structure solves bias, but I would argue it can exacerbate the pressure on minority employees in a way that organic relationships do not.
How so? The data suggests structure is the only thing that mitigates the like-me bias.
By creating what's called a tax. Research shows there is a heavy tax on minority mentors in these formal programs. Because there are fewer minority leaders in senior positions, when a formal program demands diversity, those few leaders get oversubscribed. They feel this pressure to work harder than their peers to prove their worth and to lift up every single junior minority employee. When you formalize these programs, you often end up overburdening the very people you claim you're trying to empower. You just burn them out in the name of equity.
I think that's a capacity issue, not an argument against the program. That's solved by broadening the pool of mentors and redefining the role, which brings me to the concept of mosaic mentoring, developed by researchers like Shane, Davis, and Garrison. This moves us away from the single guru approach.
This is the idea that you need a whole village, not just one person.
Exactly. In a formal ecosystem, you don't just have one boss telling you what to do. You have a coach, a confidant, a griot, who is the oral historian of the organization, an opener of doors, and a sponsor. This model is essential for non-white people and women in traditionally white male organizations because it distributes the weight. You aren't looking for one perfect savior. You are building a structural mosaic of support. And this solves the tax issue you mentioned by spreading the load.
Okay. I appreciate the concept of the mosaic. It's a lovely theoretical framework. But let's look at the human reality inside that structure. If a majority mentor, say a white male executive, is paired with a minority learner as their opener of doors, that relationship is going to be deeply impeded if the mentor is unwilling to adapt their cultural views. The structure can force them into a room together, but it cannot force the mentor to empathize. You can mandate the meeting, you can't mandate the understanding.
But the structure can force the sponsorship, and that matters more than the empathy. I want to cite this fascinating study from 1958 by Margaret Kussler. She interviewed female executives, and this is decades before the term glass ceiling was even common. She found that for every successful female executive who didn't own her own company, the magic formula was a sponsor-protege relationship. Someone gave her a push.
The push is undeniable. I'm not arguing against help. I'm arguing against the method of assignment.
But here's the key. Members of the majority culture are perceived as more competent by the organization. That's just the bias we are living with. Therefore, a majority mentor, simply by virtue of their status, can assist a minority learner in receiving the credit they are actually due. If we wait for that majority mentor to naturally want to help, we might be waiting forever. The program ensures the connection happens, and that connection, even if it's culturally imperfect, even if the chemistry is low, provides the reflected power necessary for advancement. It's functional.
That is a compelling argument for sponsorship, I'll admit. It treats the mentor as a tool for leverage rather than a source of wisdom. But let's look at what actually happens inside these relationships when we try to engineer the wisdom part. This brings me to the mechanics of growth. When you institutionalize mentorship, you start training mentors in specific techniques.
As you should. Wisdom requires a method. You can't just wing it.
But some of these methods border on manipulation when they're applied in a hierarchy. Take the technique of sewing, described by Aubrey and Cohen. The mentor gives initially unclear or unacceptable advice to the learner. Or catalyzing, where the mentor plunges the learner into change to provoke a shift in identity.
Those are standard pedagogical tools. You create cognitive dissonance to stimulate growth. If I just tell you the answer, you don't learn.
In a friendship, maybe. In a philosophy class, sure. But in a corporation, if my boss's boss gives me unacceptable advice as some sort of secret test, that isn't mentoring, that's mind games. It causes unnecessary stress. In a formal power dynamic, catalyzing looks a lot like hazing. It damages psychological safety. A mentor is supposed to be a safe harbor, not the person tossing you into the storm to see if you can swim.
I think you are taking the most cynical view of these techniques. Leadership authors Kouzes and Posner call these teachable moments. Mentorship isn't just about holding hands. It includes harvesting, assessing the utility of what the learner has done, and accompanying, walking alongside them. But more importantly, the structure protects the learner from burnout through what we call the cup framework.
The cup framework.
Yes, it addresses exactly your concern about stress. The content is the input professional knowledge, life skills, the water you are pouring. The context is the cup itself, the learner's capacity to hold that information. Formal programs help mentors understand that they can't just pour from a fire hose. They have to build the cup, the context, before they fill it. Without that training, without the engineering of the program, mentors just dump information and burn out their mentees. The structure ensures the flow is regulated. Or the structure dictates a curriculum that fills the cup with sludge the mentee doesn't need. But I want to pivot to a specific failure mode of this engineered wisdom. Look at the education sector. We see instructional coaches. These are former teachers trained to mentor current teachers. Ideally, it's supportive, but research by Alina Aguilar and Jim Knight shows a critical flaw. If the instructional coach and the school principal aren't aligned on their goals, the teacher gets mixed messages.
That sounds like an organizational failure, not a mentorship failure. It's a structural failure. The mentor becomes an enforcer of administrative will, not a confidant for the teacher's growth. The teacher can't be vulnerable with the mentor because the mentor is reporting back to the principal. True mentorship requires confidentiality and independence from the immediate bottom line. Formal programs almost always compromise this independence because the mentor becomes an agent of the institution.
That is a risk, but it's one that can be managed with clear guidelines on confidentiality. And frankly, the very definition of mentorship is evolving. Innovation is allowing us to break down these hierarchies entirely. We are seeing the rise of reverse mentoring.
This is where the junior employee teaches the senior leader?
Correct. With the explosion of digital innovations, younger employees are often more fluent in technology, social media, and digital trends than executives are. Reverse mentoring creates a formal channel for that knowledge to flow upward. It flattens the hierarchy. An organic system would never allow a 22-year-old to mentor a CEO. The social distance is too great. A formal program bridges that gap and gives the junior employee a seat at the table.
But is that mentorship, or is that just tech support with a fancy title?
It is absolutely mentorship. It changes the dynamic of who holds value in the organization. It builds empathy in the senior leader for the junior experience.
The definition of mentorship involves psychosocial support. I am not sure that teaching a CEO how to use TikTok or explaining the blockchain provides psychosocial support to the CEO. It's transactional. It is a knowledge transfer, yes, but it lacks the depth of the mentor-protege bond. My fear is that as we move toward these blended mentoring models, combining IT, e-mentoring, and occasional face-to-face meetings, we're just diluting the substance.
Blended mentoring increases satisfaction. It combines the efficiency of online tools with the impact of personal advice. It's the best of both worlds. You get the data and the human touch.
But we are using it to plug a hole that is widening in our society. I mentioned that 13% decline in informal mentorship earlier. That decline is linked to the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis. We lost access to the community-based mentors, the teachers, the coaches, the clergy, the extended family members. These were the people who provided the foundation of resilience, particularly for young people.
Which is exactly why we need formal programs to step in. If the community is retreating, the organization must advance.
But a corporate program cannot replace a community. If we rely solely on blended corporate programs, we are treating a deep social wound with a Band-Aid. We are replacing deep, community-based bonds with speed networking and reverse mentoring assignments. We are engineering a substitute for human connection. And I worry that we will forget the difference between a mentor and a manager. We're automating a relationship that requires a soul.
I see the risk, but I would argue the alternative is silence. If the community bonds are fraying due to the pandemic, due to economic shifts, institutions have a pragmatic obligation to build scaffolds to replace them. We can't simply mourn the loss of the village. We have to build a new one, even if we have to use blueprints and committees to do it.
And I argue that scaffolds are not roots. You can build all the structure you want, but if the ground isn't fertile, if the chemistry isn't there, nothing grows.
Let's bring this to a close. We've covered matching algorithms, diversity implications, pedagogical mechanics, and the future of digital mentorship. To summarize my position, we cannot rely on serendipity for professional development in a complex world. The data is clear. Formal mentoring, especially high potential in new hire programs, provides the necessary scaffold for career stability. It reduces burnout, specifically emotional wariness and depersonalization, and ensures knowledge transfer happens for everyone, not just the privileged few. The cup framework, the mosaic, these are tools that allow us to scale wisdom. To leave it all to chance is to leave talent on the table.
And to summarize my view, structure without chemistry is hollow. While the intent of formal programs is noble, the reality often drifts toward the cloning model or transactional instruction. We have to prioritize the quality of the relationship over the mere existence of the program. A bad match is a damaging experience, and we need to be vigilant that we are not replacing fading organic community bonds with sterile corporate assignments. We need nurturing, not just matching.
Perhaps the middle ground lies in that concept of the mosaic.
I think so. A diverse collection of relationships.
Some might be formally assigned, your sponsor or coach, ensuring you get the opportunities and the credit you deserve.
And others must remain organic, your confidant, your friend, driven by the learner's specific needs and chemistry, free from the company's agenda.
So we suggest you look at your own professional relationships. Are you being cloned?
Or are you being nurtured? And are you waiting for a goddess to appear? Or are you signing up for the program?
Thank you for listening to the debate.